Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG review. I am Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, yes, I am going to take a dive into the latest controversy, self-inflicted by yet another executive of Wizards of the Coast. And the timing of this is really quite astounding because the day prior to Kyle Brink's interview with Three Black Halflings, I had done a video talking about alternatives for Dungeons and Dragons or fantasy tabletop role playing games that you could go to if Wizards of the Coast is no longer represented of the representative of the direction that you're looking to take your own gameplay to. And so I had just done that video over the weekend and came out sometime Monday morning, and then this thing hit Monday evening. Looking at this interview, and I watched it 2.5 times, and over this particular section several times as well. And just looking at this quote, I want to break this down. And I know there are 50 other people that have done this already, but I haven't come across one that pinpointed the issue with or another issue with this statement. So let me begin. There's been mistakes made in years past where people assumed that D&D players were all, white dudes in a basement, which has been a faulty assumption for a lot of years and gets more and more false every day. And so in my viewpoint, honestly, guys like me can't leave soon enough for this hobby. All right, so that's its entirety. Let me break this down. There has been a mistake made in years past where people assumed that D&D players were all, white dudes in a basement. So he acknowledges that this was a faulty mistake, a faulty, mistaken assumption. All right, and he says that it's been known for years that it's a faulty assumption. And yet, he's saying that the hobby needs to move as if that faulty assumption was a reality. All right, so it's a very contradictory thing. It's saying, well, we know that this was wrong, based on our view, and so those people that we have held this wrong assumption with have to get out of the hobby, not the people making the assumption. All right, the false assumption. Why didn't he say, and the people making this assumption are no longer welcome in the hobby? All right, I mean, that would be much more accurate, a much more, a fair assessment of where the consequence lies. I mean, here it's like we held a stereotypical view of the player base, and therefore the player base needs to get out of the hobby because of our false assumptions. It doesn't make any sense. The other part of this is the last point. In my viewpoint, honestly, guys like me can't leave soon enough for this hobby. So now he is speaking for the entire hobby, not just for Wizards of the Coast, not just for Dungeons and Dragons under Wizards of the Coast. He's speaking for the entire hobby. All right. He's obviously not speaking for himself because he should have followed that line up with, and therefore I will be stepping down and stepping aside for someone who doesn't look like me to take over my position. Of course, he doesn't do that. That's not what they ever do. All right. This is just, well, somebody else. Or when I finally decide that I'm going to, move on from this, I want to leave it to, I want to leave it to someone who is marginalized. All right, but not while I'm still here. Or I'm not talking about my position. You know, the hypocrisy of this is just so extreme that, I don't know how anyone can look at this and say, at this point, and this is my own personal belief, but I'm pretty sure that others share it as well. Wizards of the Coast cannot leave the tabletop role playing hobby soon enough. All right, they are a detriment to the hobby, and they need to move on. They don't want to be here anyway. They don't respect the player base. They don't respect the legacy of the IP that they unfortunately hold, and they don't understand or value the tabletop role playing game hobby. All right, they've been saying from day one that this group of executives came into Wizards of the Coast that the hobby of tabletop role playing based on physical resources, all right, is not monetized enough. And the the consumer base, at least 80% of the consumer base is not buying the product, not supporting, the company, and therefore they want to move this to a whole new model and a different mode. All right, they want to move this to video game land. All right, and this is what their intentions are, but they want to, again, as I've said in previous videos, they want to leave the field barren in their wake. All right. As they leave, they want to make sure that everything left behind them is decimated. All right. And so I really, really hope that Wizards of the Coast at this point just fades away. Do not promote their products, don't watch their movie, their television show, do not run any Wizards of the Coast product on Roll20, which they were looking to destroy as well, or any other VTT that is not theirs. Don't talk about any of their new releases. I don't know why anybody would want to buy their new releases, but just don't give them any visibility. Let them die on the vine. All right. And we can, as a hobby, continue without them. It's been years since they have contributed anything to the hobby as a whole. All right. And I want you to think about that. Think about what popularity was brought to the hobby, the tabletop role playing hobby, wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. All right. It was other entities like Critical Role or Stranger Things. And those aren't even based on Wizards of the Coast products. Stranger Things is showing you AD&D first edition. All right. Critical Role began with Pathfinder, only moved to the D&D label. What Matthew Mercer and company run at their table is not 5th edition. It is a hybrid between so many different editions plus their own creation. It's their own game practically. And so to say that Wizards of the Coast has contributed to anything, I mean, you'd have to go back to just the transition from 4E to 5E. That was the only improvement that they actually did. And all that was making up for their own disastrous decisions with 4E. It's like someone burning down the house and then coming in with a fire extinguisher to put it out, and then claiming, oh, we just saved the house. There comes a time when, a company should really just hang it up and, shelve the product line, shelve the IP, let it sit there, and maybe, 10, 15 years down the road, you'll be able to sell it off to someone who actually knows what the hell they're going to do with it, rather than this nonsense. So yeah, Wizards of the Coast cannot leave the tabletop role playing hobby soon enough for me, and I know for many, many others. And if how many times can these people just be as ridiculously stupid as this? All right, as Kyle Brink, is just so out of touch that he didn't check himself during an interview, and be like, oh crap, maybe this is not an inclusive message. Maybe this is not a smart thing to do or say, as we're trying to rebuild trust, all right, in our company. The trust is dead, all right, and there's no coming back. Probably previously there was very little chance of coming back from the other 3 or 4 mistakes you made prior to this. This is really the nail in the final nail in the coffin, or at least I hope that it is. So, Wizards of the Coast, be gone. Um, please stop looking to make product for the tabletop role playing hobby. Um, don't release your future books. No one's going to buy the Golden Vault. Um, your last 3 books are still sitting in warehouses. Nobody wants to pick them up because they're not being sold at retail. Hopefully, no one watches the movie. Let it just die. I'm hoping that it is one of the lowest performing opening weekends ever seen in movie history, and that would be the greatest sign that there's no recovery for Wizards of the Coast, and then we can move forward in the hobby that we've been with. All right, I've probably been in this hobby longer than Kyle Brink has been alive. All right, so we continue to support the tabletop role playing hobby. We will continue to play TSR era Dungeons and Dragons, true Dungeons and Dragons, because everything else after that with Wizards of the Coast have just been poor copies of what the legendary creators of TSR in the 70s and 80s actually produced. All right, and this is where the hobby really does need to go. The hobby needs to go forward without Wizards of the Coast. So let's leave them behind. Let's leave them in a barren wasteland, rather than them thinking that they can do the other thing around. So once again, I know that I try not to, come out with these very specific, and negative videos, but at this point, it's time to, just move on from Wizards of the Coast, and let them, like I said, let them die on the vine. As you will see in my closeout screen, I have removed all 5th edition product from my shelf. It is currently in my mind, like someplace between my selling it off, and I'm talking about 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition, um, giving it to my niece, However, I'm reluctant to even do that because I wouldn't want to pass on a product to my niece, who who will then have and possibly use a product by a company that does not respect or want people like her uncle or her father, or maybe someday her son, to actually participate in that hobby. My third and possible choice, although it pains me to destroy books, is to just sit there and on camera shred them, and just let them watch the books shred. And that's my last resort. I'm waiting to see what kind of a comment or action Wizards of the Coast takes. I doubt any. I'm waiting to see what their Hasbro stocks do. I know they were down slightly yesterday, but this hasn't gotten out as far yet. It was Monday night video interview, and Tuesday. A lot of the community has been you know pointing at this and talking about this, and if it hits the mainstream again, mainstream press again, whether it be Bloomberg or CNBC or any of those financial market news outlets, then I think that Hasbro stock is going to take another steep dive, and I think at that point, Wizards of the Coast may just have to step off the scene and just not produce anything for a while. I mean, this past weekend was a disaster for D&D Beyond to begin with. I mean, they're running character sheets and they can't keep their servers stable with character sheets. It's just amazing to me. So thanks for stopping in. Leave your questions or comments. If you disagree with me, you're free to disagree with me. I will even respond and react to your disagreement. If you agree with me, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Share the video out there, and hey, keep on playing the games that you love. But at this point here, I'd ask that you take serious consideration in leaving Wizards of the Coast and their products behind, and just not dealing with them anymore. So with that, have a good afternoon. Take care.